It's impressive how tiring it can be to just sit there and wait. You and the clock, just sitting there, waiting for the moment to pass. Moments of action followed by yet longer moments of inaction. Time spent looking forward to something only to realize that when you do actually have it, you're just going to move on to looking towards something else. Looks like that's time, so I guess I better get started. After all, I've got a lot to look forward to. After this, I get to wait all over again. The difference is this should be the last time, the final coat of caliper paint before I can pick up where I left off. And hopefully all the time I've spent waiting for paint to dry was actually worth it. I mean, at this point it feels like forever since I've been able to make actual progress. Although in reality, part of me does realize it's only been about a week. Doing all this waiting was initially frustrating, but honestly I think it's just made me more excited for the final result. Ready for that emotional high of having something I've worked towards for a while. Some sort of a hedonic peak. I mean, waiting for something just makes you like it more. Gives you something to look forward to. And then when you do get it, you'll be more appreciative, right? Well, if that was completely true, I feel like it would be good to always want more, which is something I know can't be true. What if delayed gratification isn't the entire answer? What happens when the happiness you get from the thing you've waited so long for fades? Nothing lasts forever after all. And at the absolute worst, what if, when you reach the emotional peak, it's not all it's cracked up to be? And this peak is actually just the base of another hill you've got to climb. The next thing for you to want. In reality, I guess there's only one way to tell if waiting for something was really worth it. Actually doing the waiting. As the timer rang, I really only had one question on my mind. Since we spent so much time on those calipers, how did they even turn out? And for that matter, was it even worth it? Only one way to find out, I guess. For how inexpensive this kit actually was, I was actually pretty impressed. Now, it's obviously nowhere close to something like a powder coat finish, but considering where we actually started, this finish is comically better. And the one thing I notice above anything else about it is just how glossy it is. I've found that most paints that claim that they're glossy never actually are, but this actually lives up to the reputation, which is something I'm absolutely stoked about. It's not a question if these look better than they used to, but it is a question if they actually match the front brakes. And no, they're not absolutely perfect. But for $30-something of supplies and a good amount of elbow grease, this is going to work out more than fine. And it's definitely going to look better than if we had done nothing at all. In other words, the time waiting for progress was finally at an end. The ball was back in my court, and it was time to make my next move. So I picked up right where we left off, by removing the rest of the old brake lines from the system that had been left draining all week. Since we're replacing all 4 of the rubber hoses with braided ones, we're no longer going to need these. All 4 brake lines are off, and we've reached yet another fork in the road. Since we're upgrading both the front and rear of this car, we get to choose which ones we want to start with. And they're actually completely different systems. Since we finally have the rear brakes looking good though, that's where I chose to start. And this upgrade is a little atypical. I mean, we're not actually replacing the caliper, so how are we actually going to get more stopping power? And the answer? Well, it actually lies in the realm of physics, and ratchets are a great analogy. The longer the ratchet, the less effort you have to put into pulling it in order to get the same bolt to turn loose. And that same exact theory can apply to brakes, but replace the ratchet with a rotor. Assuming we keep the caliper the same, the easiest way for us to improve the braking force is to actually just put a bigger rotor on. That way the actual braking force is further from the center of the wheel, which gives you more stopping power with the same caliper. And just so happens to be exactly where our Apikol kit comes in. At its simplest, this is a brake caliper spacer. It's built for the B5 and allows us to run a 300mm rear rotor on the car. And it's going to be balanced with our front brake upgrades so we don't lose any braking bias front-rear. Plus, with the custom rotors from Rotorlab, we should have everything we need for a bolt-on install. And the parts are absolutely gorgeous. Now, I have quite a bit of faith that this brake kit's actually going to fit the car. But what I didn't know at the time was if the larger rotor would clear the dust shield, and shockingly, it does. So I moved on immediately to installing the kit, which starts by threading in their spacer with the original bolts that go in this same place. And because of the way this spacer sits, the actual caliper hanging bracket is going to be sitting in a much different position. In fact, the whole distance of the spacer further out into the wheel well. So the rotor is actually going to need both a different size and a different offset to fit in the new spot. And thankfully the ones we bought from Rotorlab were built specifically to work with this kit. And other than the addition of a spacer and the new brake lines, replacing the rears is basically the same process as upgrading the normal brakes. I actually had the caliper fully reinstalled with pads before I realized that it would be a lot easier to take it off again to install the new brake line. So it came right back off. And the new braided line installs to the old hard line just like the OEM does. Where it differs is how it attaches to the caliper. And this time it just has a banjo bolt, which is super simple. But with that in place, we can get back to putting the caliper into its new home. And this time we can actually tighten everything down. The only things I'm not going to torque down now are the brake lines. And that's really because I'd prefer to do it all at once before I bleed the system so I don't forget any. Barring anything brake fluid related, this wheel well is technically complete. This is what the new brakes are going to look like, and they're absolutely huge compared to the old ones. Plus, the caliper paint looks absolutely stellar. I was completely thrilled and decided to continue this momentum by moving on to the other side, which follows an identical process other than, for some reason, the dust shield is completely different. I've never actually noticed this before, and I don't really know why. But the rotor does clear, so I'm not going to question it too much. I guess it's gonna be what it'll be for now. Super weird though. With the parking cable finally reinstalled, I was ready to move on to the front. Time to toss on the Brembos, in other words. And while I was thrilled, I couldn't help but thinking that I was forgetting something. In fact, no, I knew I was forgetting something. These brakes bolt right up, or at least they should have. What we ran into was actually an issue that they mentioned might happen in the kit. The hardware was so long that it was hitting the rotor. So in other words, we've got to figure something out before we can put these on. I guess I've got to run to the store. Now, the install guide says that you can cut the hardware to get it to fit, but it's such a close tolerance that I'd rather not mess it up. So my thought is I'll just grab a second washer of the same size and toss that on. I think it'll look better than cutting it too. And since we're actually installing these this time, I started by threading in the new brake lines. Once again, not going to fully tighten it until the end. And from here, it should be smooth sailing. Just for fun, before I install the new washers, I figured I would check if I was misremembering. The bolt has this cool spacer, which is a tolerance fit with the caliper itself. But currently looking through the caliper, you can see that the bolt is hitting the rotor. And that's exactly where this hardware that we picked up comes in. And really, it's as simple as just adding a second washer. I was hoping to find a thicker washer, but this is what they had, and it should work just fine for now. I tossed it in with the extra washer, and what do you know? Looks like we've got all the clearance in the world right now, so we're ready to continue the install. Which starts by trying to get a washer and nut onto the other side of this bolt, top and bottom. Easier said than done. But eventually the caliper was in place and ready for pads. And these are incredibly easy to swap in. They're huge, and one goes on either side. To keep them in place, the kit comes with a retaining clip that pushes them in and a pin that goes through the caliper. And so far, everything has been fitting like a dream. After all, I bought this kit with the understanding that the rotor and the caliper were machined to specifically fit this car. In other words, hopefully there will be no fitment issues. At least, that would have been nice. Turns out, we ran into a pretty big one almost immediately. Our new wheels absolutely clear the outside of the caliper, but the spokes sadly do not clear the front. It's super close though. Honestly, I think something like a 2mm spacer would be more than enough. But for now, we're sadly going to have to run the 10mm until those show up. I guess the poke will continue for a little longer. At least hopefully that'll be the only fitment issue we run into today, right? So the wheel's not spinning. Looks like the custom rotors don't actually clear the upright, both on the top and the bottom. Which is a little weird considering I was told they were built to do that. Oh well, I guess. At least it's fixable. Just gotta go to the store again to get more persuasive tools. Life goes on. These rotors are still more than usable. I mean, they're brand new, and to my knowledge, they are custom. But since they don't clear the upright, we're gonna have to do another modification that is popular on these cars, but one I didn't think we were gonna have to do based on the kit itself. We need clearance. So we're gonna make some. And it turns out we've already got some rust preventative coating. So really, it should just be smooth sailing. It's just part of the reason I bought the custom kit was so we didn't have to do this. Really isn't the end of the world though. Just another opportunity to pivot. My goal was to shave off basically as little as I needed to get the rotor to sit on the car without running into anything. So the whole process was to grind a little bit off, test fit, look where we're hitting, and then grind off even more. Honestly, didn't take too long. And really, the $14 Harbor Freight special was more than enough to get this job done extremely quickly. I love that there's a store that exists where I can spend $14 on a tool and it works. With a bit of extra clearance on the top and bottom, the rotor began to spin freely. What a relief. And that meant that I was in the clear to reinstall the custom brake kit and make sure there were no other issues. This time, hopefully at least the wheel spins. And the good news is it absolutely does. Roadblock successfully avoided, with a quick detour to the store that is. Either way, just like the rear, this front is technically bolted on now. All we need to do is the same process to the other side. Then we can come back, torque down all the brake lines and bleed the system, which means we're getting close to driving the car again. I was getting excited. I've been looking forward to these big brakes for a long time, actually. There's something I've wanted on this car since I first bought it. So not only is this something that I've been waiting for a while, since a lot of it was custom built, but I've been saving for it for a while too. And I see this upgrade as one of two big aspirational goals for the S4 project as a whole. Turbos obviously being another. And since I've wanted and worked for this so long, it's been built up in my mind. And now that it's all finally here and happening, I couldn't be happier. It's an absolute emotional high for me. I know that. I know this is making me happy. But I also know and fully acknowledge that this happiness will not last forever. Nothing lasts forever, especially happiness derived from things. And I openly accept that. But just because I understand that this isn't going to make me happy forever doesn't mean I'm any less grateful. People confuse accepting that life has highs and lows and the highs don't last forever as pessimism, but I couldn't agree less. I think acknowledging that is not only a way to make you feel more grateful for everything around you, but a good way to figure out what actually makes you happy. Not just an emotional high, but something that lasts. And at the very least, acknowledging that provides a lot of context to everything around you. Without bad, good wouldn't be a thing. Without darkness, light means nothing. So maybe it's better to stop chasing emotional highs and focus on raising your emotional average. But that being said, I was hoping this one would last a little bit longer. All of the brakes were installed. All that was left to do before we could drive the car was torquing all of the brake lines and bleeding the system. So I went from caliper to caliper, starting in the rear, double checking that none of our lines were going to leak as soon as we put fluid in. And I wish I could say this was a quick process. I wish I could say a lot of things. The install kit for the calipers says we need to check tightness for both the crossover tubes and the bleeder screws. They should be snug and just need to be tightened a little bit. And I wish I could say that that was true, but I can't. 3 of the 4 crossover bolts were tight. 1 felt completely different. In fact, it didn't feel like anything at all. No feeling from the first turn. Sure didn't feel like it was getting any tighter. And the whole time I just kept thinking to myself, there's just no way. But the bolt just kept spinning, grasping for nothing. I don't think this was ever tight to begin with. At least it never was since I got it. I wish I could say this caliper wasn't stripped, that it was usable without modification, but I can't. And it's not going to hold fluid like this. I wish I even knew how it was stripped, but I don't know. It was completely loose from the first spin. It felt nothing like the other 7 bolts. And looking even closer, it just gets weirder. I pulled off the crossover tube and noticed a couple things. For starters, the threads on it are absolutely perfect. There's no mistaking that this piece is brand new. And there's absolutely no residue in the threads or indication that this was what stripped the caliper. Strange. Especially considering this caliper was supposed to be rebuilt, you'd think that that would have been caught. Things do happen, so who really knows? All I know right now is this. This is the biggest issue we've ran into with this kit, and I don't know for certain if this custom-made caliper is going to be usable. Super cool. There's a lot of things that I wish. I wish there was a quick way to fix this issue, that this caliper would be usable without quite a bit of machining. I even wish that I was the one who stripped it, because then at least I would know what happened. But it was like this since I first checked it, so we were likely just sent a caliper that scaped through the testing. In other words, my best bet is to reach out to them and see what they say. There could absolutely be a way we can salvage this caliper and keep it used on the car, but right now I don't know for sure. It's all really going to hinge on what they end up saying. And the scarier part is I don't know how long that's going to take. I ordered these calipers a couple months ago, so I don't know how long it would take for them to get another one made. What I do know is this car can't stay in here for an undetermined amount of time while we wait for an answer. So brakes or no brakes, by the end of today, it's got to move to a spot where it can sit for a little bit longer. Earlier this weekend, I was hoping that my waiting was complete, but from how things seem now, the waiting might have actually just started. Thankfully, at least, we know that the cable parking brake works just fine, and the car really doesn't have to make it that far. Really, I just need to move it to a spot where it can sit until I hear back from them. I wish I could just leave it on jack stands, but sadly that's not the case. I boxed up all the brake parts on that side and decided to take them with me. I figure at the very worst we can take it to a machine shop and see what they would suggest. But really I shouldn't do anything until I hear back from where I got it from. Pretty lame situation overall though. Talk about abruptly ruining an emotional high. What's even worse is how good the brakes that are on the car actually look. They are so much better than what was on the car before, and I can't imagine how they're actually going to work once everything's all figured out. It just sucks that until that happens, the car gets to sit here with 3 calipers. Weight reduction, I guess. I guess all of this is in line with what I was thinking of earlier though. Good is only perceived as good because bad exists to begin with. You've got to have both of them to provide perspective, otherwise they're both meaningless. So maybe I can take solace in that. Maybe my understanding that emotional highs don't last forever can also be applied to emotional lows. So really, I shouldn't let this keep me down too long. After all, maybe going through a low like this is really just gonna make getting the car finally working in the end that much more fulfilling. At least that's what I hope. In reality, I guess there's only one way to tell if waiting for something was worth it. Actually doing the waiting. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can help support me and my channel. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.